Listen, I need every single Cowboys fan to hear what I'm about to say because a massive contract just got signed in the NFL, and it has direct implications on what Dallas does with George Pickens this offseason. And honestly, before we get into all of this, if you're a diehard Cowboys fan and you're not subscribed yet, I'm begging you, hit that subscribe button right now because this channel covers every Cowboys update the second it drops, and I'm not getting the subscribers I deserve for the amount of work we put in. So help me out, smash subscribe, and let's build this thing together. Now let's get into it because Jaxon Smith-Njigba just inked a record-breaking extension with the Seattle Seahawks, and the number that's floating around is absolutely jaw-dropping. We're talking about $42.5 million per year in new money, and the moment that deal became public, every single person in the football world started asking the same question: what does this mean for George Pickens? And by extension, what does it mean for the Dallas Cowboys? And the crazy part is there are people on both sides of this argument screaming at each other. Right now, you've got one camp saying Pickens should immediately demand 38, 39, maybe even 40 million a year. And then you've got another camp saying, hold on, slow down. This doesn't change Pickens' situation at all. And I'm going to walk you through exactly where I think the truth actually lands because it's more complicated than either side wants to admit. So first, let's talk about what JSN actually got, because the headline number and the real number are two very different things. Yes, the new money averages out to around $42.5 million per year, but when you factor in the full length of the contract, which includes the remaining year on his rookie deal, plus the fifth-year option, the total average drops to somewhere around $32.5 million per year over the life of the deal. And that distinction matters a lot because if George Pickens were willing to sign a similar structure where the early years are cheaper and the new money kicks in later, Dallas would probably jump at that in a heartbeat. But here's what nobody is talking about. Pickens almost certainly doesn't want that kind of structure. He's going to want big money right now, not deferred money that kicks in 2 or 3 years down the road. And that's where things get tricky for the Cowboys front office. Now, let's put JSN and Pickens side by side for a second because context matters. Jaxon Smith-Njigba just won a Super Bowl. He's been producing at an elite level since the day he was drafted into this league. He's the reigning Offensive Player of the Year. And here's the kicker. He's 2 years younger than Pickens. So when you look at it from a pure market standpoint, JSN is in a tier that very few receivers in the NFL occupy right now. And I think most honest evaluators would say that Pickens, while incredibly talented, is not quite at that same tier, at least not yet. Does that mean Pickens isn't worth big money? Absolutely not. The man had an all-pro caliber season last year. He was a top 5 receiver in total receiving yards, and he showed the kind of explosiveness and playmaking ability that franchises pay premium dollars for. And this is but there are factors beyond just production that play into what a player gets paid, and this is where it gets uncomfortable for some people to hear because we have to acknowledge that there's a difference in the off-field profiles of these two players. JSN has been a model citizen on and off the field, no issues with meetings, no controversy, no drama. He's the kind of guy that a franchise feels completely safe investing $100+ million in. And George Pickens, look, I'm not trying to pile on the guy, and I'm definitely not carrying water for Jerry Jones or Stephen Jones, but the reality is that Pickens has come with some baggage, and when you're talking about contracts in this range, teams factor that stuff in, whether we like it or not. So where does that leave Dallas? Well, I think the realistic range for a George Pickens extension is somewhere between 33 and 38 million per year, and I know some of you just spit out your coffee because you think that's too high, and others think that's too low, but hear me out. CeeDee Lamb signed his deal at the top of the wide receiver market when he got his extension. And at the time, that was the going rate for an elite number 1 receiver. Now, 1 year later, the market has moved, and Pickens, having put up the kind of season he just had, is arguably worthy of being paid at a similar level to what CeeDee got, maybe slightly above, maybe slightly below, but right in that neighborhood. And here's the thing. I have a really hard time believing that the Cowboys are going to pay George Pickens more per year than CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee has been one of the most consistent receivers in the entire NFL with 5-6 straight 1,000-yard seasons. He's been a model of consistency both on the field and in the locker room. So the idea that Pickens would come in and immediately leapfrog CeeDee's number, I just don't see Dallas doing that. Would you do it? Honestly, ask yourself that question if you're running the Cowboys. Would you pay a guy you just acquired more than the homegrown star who's been the heartbeat of your offense for years? I don't think most people would, and I don't think the Cowboys will either, but that doesn't mean Pickens won't eventually get there. And this is where the franchise tag situation becomes absolutely fascinating because right now Pickens is sitting on the non-exclusive franchise tag, and there's a very real possibility that he plays the entire 2025 season on that tag without a long-term deal. And some people hear that and they panic, but I actually think it might be the smartest play for both sides. And let me explain why, from the Cowboys' perspective, they use the non-exclusive tag for a reason. They're not entirely sure what Pickens' true market value is, and honestly, neither is anyone else. I just gave you a $5 million range, and even that feels like a shot in the dark because Pickens' situation is so unique. Nobody expected him to have the kind of season he had last year, and the Cowboys are probably looking at this thinking, okay, worst case scenario, we make him prove it one more time before we hand him a massive long-term deal. And yeah, we know that's classic Cowboys behavior, and it's burned them before with other players. But in this specific case, that cautious approach might actually work in their favor. Think about it. If Pickens plays on the tag and puts up another monster season, then yes, you're going to have to pay him top dollar, but you also got an elite receiver for 1 year at a significant discount compared to what his open market value would have been. And if he doesn't replicate that production, or if the off-field stuff becomes an issue, then you just saved yourself from one of the worst contracts in franchise history. And from Pickens' side, there's actually an argument that playing on the tag benefits him too. And here's why. If Puka Nacua signs his extension next and the number comes in at $43 million or higher, then the market just keeps rising. And if Pickens goes out and has another all-pro season in 2025, he could legitimately be looking at $44-45 million per year next offseason. That's life-changing generational money, and all he has to do is show up, be professional, have a big year, and the bag will be waiting for him at the end of it. Now, the big question is, will he do it? Will he buy into that plan, or will he create problems because he's unhappy about playing on the tag? And that's the uncertainty that makes this whole situation so nerve-wracking for Cowboys fans, because we've seen players handle franchise tags in very different ways. Some guys show up motivated and ball out, and other guys sulk, miss meetings, cause distractions, and make the whole thing a nightmare. And nobody knows for sure which version of George Pickens we're going to get. But I will say this: Dak Prescott wants him here. CeeDee Lamb wants him here. The coaching staff believes in what he can do, and if Pickens is smart, he'll recognize that Dallas is giving him the platform to prove he's worth every penny of that next contract. And but here's what makes this even more interesting. There's a hard deadline in play here that changes the dynamics compared to other contract situations we've seen in Dallas, like the Micah Parsons situation, for example. With Micah, there was no real hard cutoff point, but with Pickens, once July 15th hits, if there's no long-term deal in place, then it's franchise tag football for the rest of the season. There's no more negotiating. There's no more leverage plays. It's just show up and play. And I think that deadline actually puts pressure on both sides to figure something out before the summer. And the other factor that people keep overlooking is the draft, because if the Cowboys are sitting there at pick 12 and a receiver falls to them that they absolutely love, that changes everything about the Pickens calculation. Suddenly Dallas has options. Suddenly the leverage shifts, and Pickens camp knows that, which is why I wouldn't be surprised if we see some movement on negotiations in the weeks leading up to the draft, because David Mulugheta, who represents Pickens, is one of the smartest agents in the business, and he knows that if Dallas drafts a first-round receiver, the entire negotiation landscape changes overnight. And speaking of Mulugheta, let's talk about whether he can pull the same kind of move he pulled with Micah Parsons last year, where he essentially forced a trade by creating enough noise and drama to make the situation untenable. And my honest answer is I don't think he can, at least not in the same way, because Micah Parsons is a generational defensive talent, and teams were willing to give up 2 first-round picks and pay him $40 million a year because of how rare that kind of player is. Wide receiver is a different position. The supply of talented receivers is higher. The risk of overpaying is greater, and I just don't think there's a team out there that's going to offer 2 first-rounders for George Pickens, knowing they'd also have to pay him north of $40 million per year. It's just too much risk for a player who has one truly elite season on his resume. So I think the most likely outcome, and this is just my opinion, is that Pickens plays on the franchise tag in 2025. He has a productive season. He stays relatively drama-free. And then next offseason, he signs a massive long-term deal either with Dallas or on the open market. And if he does stay in Dallas and he puts up another big year, I genuinely believe he could become the highest paid receiver in the NFL at that point, because the market is only going one direction, and that direction is up now. Let's zoom out for a second and talk about the bigger picture, because some of you are probably thinking, wait a minute, is it even smart for the Cowboys to have 2 receivers making over $35 million a year? And that's a completely fair question, because when you add up CeeDee Lamb's deal and a potential Pickens extension, you're looking at somewhere around $70 to $75 million per year just at the wide receiver position, and that is a massive chunk of your salary cap. So the Cowboys have to ask themselves, is that the best allocation of resources, or would they be better off letting Pickens walk and using that money to shore up the defense or invest in the offensive line? And I think reasonable people can disagree on this one, but my personal take is that if you have a quarterback like Dak Prescott and you have the chance to surround him with 2 legitimate Number one caliber receivers, you do it because in today's NFL, you need weapons, you need playmakers, you need guys who can win one-on-one matchups and create explosive plays. And having both CeeDee and Pickens on the field at the same time would give Dallas one of the most dangerous receiving duos in the entire league. And that's not something you just throw away because the numbers look scary on a spreadsheet. But I also understand the other side of the argument, and I think the Cowboys are going to have to be really creative with how they structure these contracts because you can't just ignore the cap implications of paying two receivers that kind of money. And this is where having a smart front office matters. And look, I know Cowboys fans love to clown on Stephen Jones and the front office, but structuring contracts is actually something they've been decent at over the years. So I trust that if they decide Pickens is the guy, they'll find a way to make the numbers work. All right. So let me bring this all home because we've covered a lot of ground. The JSN contract is a landmark deal, and it absolutely moves the market for every wide receiver who's about to get paid. But I don't think it fundamentally changes what the Cowboys should do with George Pickens. The approach should still be the same. Evaluate him fairly. Acknowledge that he's not quite in the same tier as JSN, at least not yet offer him a deal that's competitive but doesn't blow past CeeDee Lamb's number by a ridiculous margin. And if you can't get a deal done before July 15th, then let him play on the tag and revisit everything next offseason. It's not the sexiest plan in the world, but it's the smartest one. And sometimes in the NFL, being smart beats being aggressive. I genuinely believe Pickens can be a Cowboy for the long haul. And I think if both sides are patient, this thing works out for everyone, but it's going to take compromise from both the player and the organization. And if you've made it this far in the video, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It takes 2 seconds and it helps me keep bringing you this kind of in-depth Cowboys coverage every single day. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think the Cowboys should do with George Pickens. Should they pay him now or let him play on the tag? Do you think he's worth $40 million a year, or is that crazy talk? Let me know your thoughts because I read every single comment and I love hearing what you guys think. We're going to keep tracking this story as it develops because this offseason is far from over and the Cowboys have some massive decisions ahead. Let's ride.